It's so good to be with you right here on the India Development Debate on ET Now. I'm Supriya Shrinate, and straight on to the big story that we're tracking this evening. Move over Startup India. It is the Modi government's angel tax that is spreading scare among the country's young entrepreneurs. It all started with the taxman sending notices to scores of startups, asking them to pay tax on funds received by them from investors under Section 56 of the Income Tax Act. Under this particular clause, if a closely held company issues its shares at a price more than its fair value, the excess amount will be clubbed under income from other sources and taxed. The startup community is obviously up in arms against this move, and maybe rightly so, because industry veterans like Mohandas Pai and Anand Mahindra have raised the red flag as well. Pai has sought an urgent intervention by the government, while Mahindra says angel tax goes against the tenets of Startup India and could spoil chances of building a rival Silicon Valley here in the country. Other top CEOs like Biocon's Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw and Snapdeal's Kunal Behel have called for an immediate rollback of the draconian tax. Is angel tax the right answer to the government's depleting finances? Has this been done in haste? Is this to trigger happier move? What is the real intention behind this? What can explain the killer tax proposal of the government, which should have rather focused on developing a strong startup ecosystem? Angel tax on startups and how it will perhaps kill the spirits of young entrepreneurs is what we are discussing and debating right here on the India Development Debate this evening. Like I said, let's take this across to a stellar panel that's joining us right here. Padmaja Ruparel, CEO, Indian Angel Network; Vivek Gupta, partner in National Head M&A Tax, KPMG; founder Mr. K. Ganesh, founder The Growth Story; and Abby Zakaria, CEO, Goodbox. Thank you very, very much, each one of you, for being with us. And Abby, if I may begin with you, angel tax has reared its ugly head yet again, with several early stage startups receiving those quote-unquote draconian notices from the tax department to clear taxes on angel funding issued by them. In terms of startups that received this notice early, take us through the notice and how many other startups have actually reported similar claims.
So basically, this has been happening. Last year also it had happened that they would ask, a scrutiny is done on the companies, and there is an automatic selection process by which they pick up the companies, and after the scrutiny is done, they question the valuation, and then a tax is imposed on, like you said, Section 56. It is tax is imposed. But what's been happening is the AOs actually end up saying that this whole valuation is not acceptable because you are not meeting your targets, etc., and take the whole investment amount as an income to the company, other income, and then therefore you have to pay tax on it. So this has happened last year as well as this year to a lot of companies. Last year we got it. This year again we got it. Last year we gave the justification which was accepted, and this year we got it went to the extent where we said, okay, we did what we could, and finally we have got tax notification. But a bunch of our friends we know and other fellow entrepreneurs have got tax notices and again tax claims on this account.
Okay, Abby, just give me a minute because I want to go across to Padmaja. And Padmaja, we've heard about this before. It's not the first time we're hearing about this. Like Abby's pointing out there, it was complained about last year as well. DIPP came up with a notification in April this year to make the process easier for startups. What could be the fresh trigger this time around? Because there are many who wonder, is this the fiscal space that the government is keeping an eye on while sending these notices? And going to startups that raised, is this a case of the angel rounds before April 2018? Could that be a fresh trigger?
So, you have hit the nail on the head. The government, through its startup program, be it Niti Aayog, be it DIPP, be it SEBI, I think the entire enabling ecosystem that has been created over the last 4-5 years is really hit very, very badly with this tax notices that have been pouring in. They have not only been received by startups, but they've also been received by the investors, the individual investors. And that is very, very sad, because for a startup to raise money, it's so difficult. And then to be taxed, it becomes impossible for them to move. But the bigger issue is that it took us a very long time to get individuals to invest in startups, and now they are stepping back because they don't want to be scrutinized for a very small sliver of their portfolio which they are investing in startups. So I think, you know, from the government's perspective, or rather from the tax authorities' perspective, yes, it could be that they are trying to collect tax, but the reality is startups raise such a small amount. How much tax are you going to collect? And most of these startups are, all of them are really genuine startups. So is it really collecting tax or what?
Given the kitty is so small, what is it that you could end up collecting? And you know, your larger concern is this could kill the startup ecosystem in India. But Ganesh, let me come to you, and to be the devil's advocate for a minute, are we pressing the panic button too early? I mean, shouldn't startups be subject to the same level of tax compliance as perhaps other companies do? I mean, there is an opinion out there that believes that are startups treated with kid gloves?
No, I think no. I completely disagree with that. So let's look at from the various stakeholders in this particular game. On one hand, the government has got excellent schemes for Startup India. Is doing everything to promote startup entrepreneurship, job creation. Is rolling out the red carpet to investors to come in and invest in India, in Make in India, and all the programs. All this, I would give it 9 out of 10 top marks to the government. While they are creating this kind of a oasis in a desert or in a very challenging environment, they have put a poison ivy like this tax claim. I don't want startup to be treated with kids' gloves at all. Let them follow similar compliance norms. Here, what you are trying to do here is, you are trying to explain and tax on an investment into a startup based on a valuation of a startup, which is not a science, it is an art. I can tell you that. For every one investor who is willing to invest at a particular valuation, there are 10 savvy investors who think the valuation is too high, therefore, they will not invest. This I am talking about savvy investors. So, for me, trying to explain to a government authority or assessment officer or even to experienced investors why a startup at a point of time is valued at X is almost impossible. 9 out of 10, the valuation is wrong, the company shuts down, people lose money, angel investors lose money, 9 out of 10. So, how do I expect an assessment officer to understand or explain that particular payment? The whole question is only about, is an investment on a futuristic business, that is why it is called venture capital. A venture is investment on futurist potential. The valuation is being determined purely by demand and supply and greed. There is no real explanation possible, and you are now trying to force an explanation. That is one. And two, just look at the sheer size, the effort income tax department, assessment officer, all of them will spend, the amount of grief it gives to the entrepreneurs to send, and the wrong signal it gives to all angel investors. I can tell you, angel investors will go to heaven now. Angels will go to heaven. They do not want to invest. For, like Padmaja said, for a small amount of their money, their income tax returns have to be filed in case the company startup wants to apply to the interministerial board. It will come under scrutiny. They will get notices. They will say just not worth it. And from I feel really sad for the entrepreneur. Entrepreneur already is fighting against all odds. 10% is the chance of success of entrepreneurship.
Right.
He has to handle investors. He has to handle market and competition, and he has to handle all questions. In addition to that, he has to handle a tax notice. It is a death knell. I do not understand why government is doing it despite doing everything else as great positive effort.
And yes.
And I do not want kid glove treatment. I am only saying that understand.
Right. No, I agree with you. We don't want kid gloves treatment. Because I think of everything that you spoke, Ganesh, the toughest that he's going to handle is perhaps going to be the tax sleuth who comes to your doorstep with a tax notice there. But Vivek, that's where I want to get you. Is there some sort of a discord between the government's efforts to champion startups, you know, this blitzkrieg sort of a slogan, startup, stand up India, and the babus in the income tax department? And like Ganesh is pointing out there, this is not really science, this is art in some sense. You don't know why valuations are what they are, and you know it's a leap of faith that many investors take. And these babus are questioning valuation and share premium. Do you believe the income tax department A is justified in making these claims? There have been examples where tax of about 45-50 lakh is sought on an investment of 1 crore. Obviously, the math doesn't add up. Does it push us in a direction that, do they even understand how these things work?
So, two quick points. So, one, actually, I think this is a classic case where the intent of the government at the time that this legislation came through in the form of 5627B was not to catch these kind of transactions. The intent really was that in our country, corporate entities were used as conduits to change color of money. And that was what was sought to be plugged when this section was first introduced into the law. So this is a classic case where the income tax department is trying to misapply, from an intent perspective, is trying to misapply the provisions and the power that is available to it under the law for an entirely different reason. I completely agree with the points that Ganesh made. Frankly, to me, it's not even a question of what is the amount that the government will recover. Fundamentally, this entire attempt to tax startups on angel investments is entirely principally and conceptually unfair. So that is point one. Point two is, fact of the matter is that the government now, post 2017, has a very strong provision in the law through the application of GAR, which is anti-avoidance regulations. The moment you have a GAR provision in the law, you do not actually need an additional provision to catch transactions that are in the nature of malified transactions. The GAR provisions come with their own safeguards in the sense that GAR can be applied only once a quasi-judicial body, once a GAR panel headed by a retired High Court judge or a Supreme Court judge actually favors the implementation of GAR in a certain situation. When the government questions, or when the tax department is questioning a startup, they're essentially saying that someone put in money at you at an inflated price because there was some other underlying transaction which wasn't disclosed. Something to the effect that you paid him cash, and in order to make you whole, he paid you through check a completely inflated sum of money by investing in your company. Now, in case of startups, that is absolutely not the case. So therefore, being an unfair tax, what I call upon is not to have safeguards in the form of saying startups that have interministerial board approval should not be subject to this tax. What I say is, you already have a GAR provision under the law to catch malified transactions. Why do you need this specific provision at all?
Okay.
Number one. Number two,
okay,
the example that you gave.
No,
the example
Vivek,
that you gave, a 40 lakh.
Vivek, give me a minute. I'll have to move on. I'll come back to you because there's a lot of ground that I need to cover. So I'll just request all of you to keep your answers crisp. But Abby, coming to you, Commerce Minister Suresh Prabhu has tweeted, and I think he even gave a soundbite today, that he's taken this up with the Finance Ministry, hopes to listen from them. Have you received any feedback from the government so far on how they plan to redress this? Is there any communication whatsoever on some of the notices that have been issued?
I personally am not following, but there are a bunch of guys who are interacting with DIPP, etc. And they will be meeting the government to address some of these issues. But still, it is at a very nascent stage, and I think we are still discussing on, what documents are required, what approvals are required by DIPP, etc. We should be like fundamentally questioning whether this is right or wrong, So we have not received any formal communication from the government, but there are, discussions happening by a bunch of guys, but that's not something which can be told at this point in time.
Padmaja, I'm curious to ask you this question. Data from CB Insights that we've been scanning does suggest that angel and seed deals in India have seen a very, very sharp drop in the last few years. Is some of this attributed to tax troubles and the, and the glaring sort of a misreading of the Tax Act and what's happening of what we are seeing as far as angel tax is concerned? Or are we really linking to seemingly unlinkable things here?
No, I think you're right, Supriya, to be honest. The tax issue, the Section 56 or the infamous angel tax as they call it, has impacted angel investing and seed investing, especially from angels. The reality is that, you know, the tax notices have been coming into companies for some time now. But I think in the last few weeks or this has literally opened the floodgates. Secondly, I think the investors are getting notices for information, and the question that I have is that when companies take in money, KYC details are provided in which the PAN cards are provided. It's as simple as going to the PAN card, pulling out the returns and checking it out. I mean, to my mind, that would be simpler for both the company and investors and the government and the tax authorities. The impact that this has happened, to be honest, is on the angel investing ecosystem in the community. There is now a very loud voice that they are only looking at investing in companies overseas. So, they are telling companies that if you want me to invest, please switch overseas, which means that there is a flight of both resources, value creation and funds out of the country, and that is really going to impact us. So, this is not a simple just startups not getting funded, but also investments of funds getting invested outside of the country, and that means all the value, the job creation, the growth of companies is moving out. That is the bigger impact.
And I think I want to talk about this next with Ganesh. And Ganesh, just when I address this, I also want to understand from you, what is the global standard when it comes to taxing angel deals? And you know, like Padmaja is pointing out there, the trouble also is that, and I think you referred to this in your previous answer when you said angel investors are going to go to heaven. The implications this is going to have on global names. I mean, what is your conversation with investors and global names like? Is this cited as a major reason? And perhaps could actually end up, investors taking the foot off their pedal as far as investing in India is concerned? Could a lot of the companies be moving overseas? And of course, then the collateral impact of all of that, which is jobs, which is investments and everything else included. Some couple of questions there actually.
No, absolutely. I think it is a major concern. Angels will go to heaven. Entrepreneurs will go abroad, people would want to invest outside and get out of this complete mess, which is completely unproductive. At worst a nuisance, at best it does not help anybody at all. Now, globally you have a concept of a accredited investor, okay, and that when you are accredited investor, the KYC is done. Therefore, after that your question. Income tax department anyway with the PAN number can go and like was mentioned earlier, look at apply principles of GAR and do whatever they want to do. Now, today what is happening, I put 10 lakhs in a company, leap of faith, I trust the entrepreneur, I like the space, I put it. And remember that 10 lakh is my tax paid money, on which tax has been paid. It goes by check, there is no black money, there is no cash, by check, tax paid money goes in. Then this whole horror story starts. I have to give my ITR returns and that has to be submitted for interministerial board, number one. After 2 years, they may get some query. For that, again, the entrepreneur for 10 lakhs will come to me. I have to give to the entrepreneur and the company my entire 3-year income tax returns. I mean, the whole thing becomes a mess, and it doesn't end there. The entrepreneur and the company is asked to justify why was the premium. Now, the entrepreneur made a certain projection. On the basis of projection, the premium was set. 90% of the cases, the projections are not met. That is the nature of a startup. I, as an investor, I am willing to live with this. I have taken the risk of putting the 10 lakhs. The entrepreneur is having sleepless nights already because the projections are not being met. I, as an investor, I am giving him huge amount of grief, and suddenly, boom, a tax notice comes, and you have to go and explain to an assessing officer why the projections were not met. Therefore, the premium was not right. This whole thing is in a mess. What globally people do? They welcome angel investors. How do they do? They give tax breaks. If I put an angel investment, not only I am not to explain, not taxed on it, in case I have to write it off, I should be allowed, like ATG benefits or other benefits, I should be allowed to write it off. so that it encourages people to do angel investment. Right now, there is no encouragement, there is huge amount of fear and a big headache. What will this happen? We will put money only in listed stocks and fixed deposit and banks, and it should be foolish for an entrepreneur to become an entrepreneur. He should go and take up a salary job where TDS is deducted, so that he can live peacefully rather than having sleepless nights of trying to explain share premium, which anyway is not explainable even to seasoned investors. How will he explain to assessing officer? I think so much retrograde stuff among all the good things you are doing, and it will involve flight of capital, flight of entrepreneurship, flight of jobs, and complete nuisance for very little absolute return. You are talking about lakhs of rupees. Just because some people misuse this opportunity to launder black money. They invested money in a small amount, took huge amount of it as return, and therefore converted black to white. Because of that, rest of 99% of the people are facing the heat. I mean, I just wish you just put me in front of the people, okay, right, through your medium or whatever. This is so simple that it is that it's really stupid.
No, I know, and I know how agonizing or frustrating it must really be for you. But I think the question that I also want to ask Vivek is, and I'm sorry I cut you short there, Vivek, but if you look at the DIPP notification this year, it doesn't necessarily really make the problem go away. I mean, for a startup to get approval for its angel round, they're supposed to hire a merchant banker to present a valuation report, submit ITR filings of potential investors. For the last 3 years, the interministerial board then only meets once a month to review these submissions. I mean, isn't it asking for way too much for a startup which has just launched, and where, if I may actually say, without sounding too biased, time and money is at a premium?
No, absolutely. And you asked the question to Ganesh about the global experience on this. See, we in India are not sitting in a well-developed angel ecosystem. US sees something between 25 to 30 billion of investment in angel and seed rounds annually. China has a system where, for example, 70% of what is invested in a startup is allowed as a deduction, is allowed as a tax deduction 2 years after the investment has been made. So the world is moving to a place where we are recognizing that the powerhouse of how economies will develop will be governed by what value these startups can create. Value is now today not being created by steel alone. Value is not being created by manufacturing industries alone. Value is being created by the intangible that all of these startups are generating. And that is how huge value shifts are happening across the world. Recognizing that even developed economies like US, UK, Germany, all of them have tax incentives. And I'm not even talking about China and Singapore, which are expected to have those kind of incentives. Therefore, to have this kind of sweeping hammer, which is completely for a different purpose, but gets applied completely differently, is actually very painful. Even at a personal level, if someone for a 5, 10, 20 lakh investment asks me to submit my income tax returns for 3 years, I think that is where the very fact that I will do an angel investment is killed. Notices that are being issued to angel investors are notices that are being issued under 133(6), which is a very powerful section under the Income Tax Act, which in a way mandates the investor to provide all sorts of information. Padmaja made absolutely the correct point. Today, at the click of a button, you have my PAN details. At the click of a button, you can access all my returns. You can access all the investments I've made. You know exactly what kind of incomes am I generating. And then if I've invested 5, 10, 20 lakhs of tax-paid money from those incomes, that is extremely retrograde and extremely ineffective. It's actually also ineffective use of the government's time in that it was not even intended by the CBDT to try and catch startups in this entire maze of laundering black money. And I come back to my fundamental point. You already have a mechanism to check malified transactions. Wherever you are apprehending malified, check it in that way. Don't apply. What is happening is various income tax offices across the country are simply applying this provision on the technicals. They say, show me a valuation report, show me the basis of that valuation report, and since they are seeing me post facto, after the fact, they have the benefit of 2 years of my actual performance. In most cases, forget the projections, in most cases, the business model of a startup may have pivoted. So I think there is absolutely a fundamental disconnect between the way the government intended this transaction to work versus the way the government is applying this transaction. And because of this fundamental disconnect, I do not believe that any notification by the DIPP is going to help. This provision needs to be withdrawn, actually.
So there needs to be a legislative action on that, and I think that's perhaps going to settle the debate once and for all. But I completely agree with both Padmaja and you, and I think Ganesh, you know, on the point that there seems to be a disconnect between the messaging that the government wants to give here and what one arm of the government may be doing. You know, and taxmen work in a very different sort of a way, having covered finance for all these years. You give them a signal that, you know, we're falling short of taxes, we need more taxes. They go after everything that they can in the realm and sphere of collecting taxes. But give me a minute, I want to go back to Abhi. And Abhi, you mentioned on Twitter that there have been founders who've shut shop because of these notices. What then is the best way forward in terms of the solutions here for entrepreneurs? I mean, you know, folding up businesses perhaps is not what is warranted or should happen.
Okay, see, let us look at a scenario where the company is ongoing, they have sufficient capital and they get a notice. Say, I'm sure that many Series B companies are there which are keeping quiet, which last year maybe tweeted saying, hey, you know what, I've been hit by an angel tax. So the Series B company has no problem. They set a bunch of guys to handle this. Okay. Then you have this guy who's actually run out of cash and shut his company maybe 1 year back, and he gets this notice of 60 lakhs saying you have to fund this amount. So that is one more category, and I know these people. Okay, some of my friends are in this position, and what they are doing is actually going through one level of appeal after another, and these appeals also take, you know, months and years. It seems the highest level takes about 3 years, right? And then there is this situation of guy who is actually probably looking for a Series A or a bridge fund, and he's got enough money to just, you know, for the next few months. But then here comes the tax claim for, you know, tens of lakhs of rupees, which wipes out months of his runway. And now, if you don't submit the 20% of the money in 30 days, then you are in violation again. And then there is a personal liability on the directors, etc., that could kick in, right? So all of this will kick in, and so I know people who are still responding. One friend of mine told that he could potentially, you know, if he has to really pay this tax, then he may even have to, you know, shut down the company.
I don't know if that's quite an extreme, because if you've got to pay a tax, you know, you have to present your case, and I believe income tax officers will see merit in there, and I don't know if holding up businesses is really, you know, the thing to do. But Padmaja, a lot of this taxation zeal is because of a suspicion that lots of funds coming back in black money that is sought to be turned white. We've spoken about this largely, and you know, I think Vivek pointed out GAR and all of that. But how does one ensure we pick out the bad apples in a way that doesn't bring the entire ecosystem down? Because if I were to go by what Abhi is saying, there are businesses that are tempted to fold up.
Yeah, so I think to Abhi's point, there's one more impact that companies go. Once they've raised their angel money and they're going in for their next round, and if there is a tax notice, the company actually fails on diligence. And it's impacted further that the fundraise doesn't come in, because, you know, the new investor is not likely to invest in a company which has some compliance issue or some diligence pending. So that is something that adds to the grief. It adds to more valuation issues also. Having said that, I think what is happening is companies, irrespective, have to fight it out. They are having to go and talk to the income tax officers, the AO, and just present their case. And this is a little subjective, because the reality is, as Ganesh pointed out, there is no way that you can actually get the valuation right. The beauty lies in the eye of the beholder, and which is the investor, right? So how is somebody who is investing in a best of the next, an innovative venture which is a futuristic, how is that going to ever fall into any kind of already premeditated businesses that exist? So it is going to be what the investor thinks is the potential of the company and what the startup thinks he can create. This is on the future and potential, not on the history of the company. This is equity financing, and there is going to be this inexactness, if I may say so. So, if we want to create a startup ecosystem which is not only the world's largest, but the world's best startups, creating the companies that we really want to make global, I think we need a much more enabling thinking from the tax authorities. I do want to point out that the government itself has moved the cheese dramatically. I think this is the only piece perhaps that I see right now as we speak, which is actually the big hurdle.
I'm going to take quick two last questions, and I'll just request both Ganesh and Vivek to make it brief. I've just got the last 2.5 minutes on the show. And Ganesh, investors do pay a premium, and you know, the inexactness, like Padmaja said, is the beauty of that premium being paid when they look at an idea and a new venture. Now, that being the case, is there an objective way to measure the fair value of a venture? Because that seems to be the big bone of contention for tax officials who believe that any investment above the fair value should be taxed as income, where of course the applicable rate is 30%.
No, there is absolutely no easy way to determine the fair market value of an investment at a venture stage. You can do discounted cash flow on projections, but the projections may not happen. Now, tell me one thing, anybody would have thought 10 years back or even 3 years back that Flipkart will be valued at 18 billion. I will tell you my own company, if I had known my big basket would be valued at 1 billion, I would have put all my wealth, including my home mortgage, and put it into the money. Being an insider, being the promoter, I had no clue. Every time a next round happens within 12 months, 18 months, the previous round guy looks to be a great hero. Okay. And if he had known the next round is going to happen at that valuation, he would have doubled down. None of us do that because it is inexact. The valuation of a company is also a function, not only it's inexact, it's also a function of demand and supply.
Right.
If you have one asset and there are 4 people wanting to invest in the asset and you can take only one investor, the price will go up. Now, the projections, most of the often the projection does not happen. And just one last point on this. The income tax guy is looking at post facto. He is looking after 2 years. The guy who invested earlier 2 years back, the investor has lost money. He looks stupid and foolish. But now the income tax guy wants tax out of it. See, the assessment officer.
Okay, Ganesh, I get your angst. Ganesh, I'm sorry, I'll have to come in there. Ganesh, I'm sorry, I'll have to come in there. I get your angst and I also get your point, but I've got the last 40 seconds on the show. And Vivek, very quickly, solution to this issue requires a lot of departments to come together. Income tax, finance, DIPP, commerce. And is that what is really adding to the complexity? Because, you know, it's not just about framing of guidelines by either of these ministries. Please make it short.
No, not really. So I disagree there. See, from the days of Chanakya, the fundamental principle of tax is if you're trying to assess tax because of a malified act, the onus of proof is on the state, on the government, to prove that a malified act was committed. By having 5627B on the statute book, you're effectively casting aspersions even on completely bona fide deals. So as a provision under the law, it's an improper provision when measured against the canons of taxation that we have seen from Chanakya's time to date. So therefore, I do not believe that many departments have to come together. I do not believe in this whole system of guidelines to sift out the good versus the bad. There should be a general provision in the Act which exists, which allows the government to proceed against the bad eggs, and that is it. 5627B does not deserve to be on the statute book.
All right. On that note, I've completely run out of time here. 5627B perhaps needs to be thrown out because not everything that the startup community is doing here needs to be scanned with the lens of earthing black money out. Completely out of time here. Thank you very, very much, this wonderful panel, Padmaja, Abhi, Ganesh, and of course Vivek, for being with us. The reality somewhere lies in what Anand Mahindra says. For startups and India to stand up like this government so boldly claims, you've got to have an enabling environment. An environment where entrepreneurs are going to thrive and not want to fold up businesses because of tax notices that arrive at their doorstep. We only can think of building a rival Silicon Valley if we create an environment like that. Completely out of time on this edition of the India Development Debate. We take a quick breather. We come back with the explosive interview with Justice Chalameshwar, the judge who led the mutiny at the Supreme Court. He talks about sealed envelopes, the Rafale deal, and much, much more right here on ET Now.